Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the March edition of the Seattle VR/AR Association webinar series. Tonight, Kirby and I are very excited to welcome Julia, one of our Seattle chapter members and CEO of Novabi, and we've got a really exciting conversation for you tonight. So we'll go ahead and get going with our slides here. Kirby, do you want to take it away tonight?
Sure. So just as I do the intro here about the VR/AR Association, please go ahead if you're live with us. Just type in the chat window. We'll see your comments here. I'm just curious where everybody's watching from tonight or this morning if you're in a different time zone. So we are in Seattle. We're part of the VR/AR Association. It's a global association, so most large cities have a chapter. But of course, now that everybody's online, we welcome everybody from all over the world. If you would like to find out more information, please contact myself or Sarah, or even Julia as well, because she's a member of the Seattle group. All right, let's go to the next. Did we have one more slide?
We do. It's just not going anywhere.
Oh.
Hold that thought.
Technology.
Technology. Yay. Hey, that's us. Looky there.
Awesome.
Do you want to proceed or do you want to start from here?
Yeah, we can go here. So
okay.
You have our contact info, so please reach out to one of us or both of us. If you have questions about the association, you can join as a student, individual, company, or even an enterprise. And what that gets you access to are many, many members. I believe we're approaching 5,000 members worldwide, dozens and dozens of chapters, 60 plus, if I recall. And we have committees that are specializing in different parts of the XR community. So for example, AEC, retail, WebXR, et cetera, So we'd love to have you join us, and there's some details there for you.
Absolutely. We would love to have you join us.
Yeah. All right. We're all having some tech problems here tonight. All right. I think we're ready to go, and I see a comment there, by the way.
Yeah, Dan Meeks is with us. Great to see you, Dan. All right. Well, bugs aside, we are ready to welcome Julia and see her actually much better presentation than we've given you tonight. So
let's not count our chickens before they're hatched, right?
Hey, you got this. We're with you.
All right. Well, I see Tacoma's in the house. All right. Good. Glad you're here. All right. I am going to share my screen, which when that happens, I will not be able to see any of you. So I'm going to be talking to myself. Feel like I'm talking to myself. So if there's timely comments that come in, Sarah and Kirby, that you want to interject with those or questions while I'm speaking, that's totally fine. I'll just let you guys handle that. So
perfect.
Let me present here. Okay. Well, hello, everybody. As Sarah and Kirby said, my name is Julia Beabout. I am the CEO and Creative Director at Novabi. We are a digital art production company specializing in augmented reality, in particular outdoor world scale augmented reality. And so we do a lot of what's called augmented reality placemaking, space activations, and tours. These are things that we are particularly passionate about and bring kind of other skill sets to that enable us to kind of be operating in these areas such as history backgrounds, social sciences, and humanities as well. So first thing is probably, I know everybody's familiar with augmented reality in this group, but may not be very familiar with placemaking. Placemaking, space activations, and tours, there's a lot of overlap in these areas, and so the distinction between them can be somewhat arbitrary and depend on who you're talking to. So placemaking is something that is a process, really. It's a design process that engages with the community in particular. That's the distinguishing factor. And it's used in a lot of different sectors. They might not always use that word or might use different words, but the process is very, very similar. You've all been in places, whether you realize it or not. They range from the Pikes Market that we're all familiar with here to the monumental, like the Washington Monument, and public art in particular. So we come at placemaking largely from the urbanism and public art sector. That's where we kind of have our background in addition to animation and gaming. But I came in my prior life, I was an architectural engineer, so I have a particular affinity for and background in the built environment, and so tend to come at it from that perspective. So one of the exciting things I think with placemaking this year is something that we've seen go on right before our eyes. It's something we all do naturally, but to really see it in action this year in all sorts of ways has been really exciting for me as a placemaker, and kind of from an anthropological social science standpoint. So most of you have probably seen in the news in particular this Monument Avenue, the kind of infamous Lee statue monument, and the projection art that was occurring on that in the wake of George Floyd's death this summer. And then even more at a local level or ground level at the same locations, people were really reclaiming that space, Black Americans in particular, and redefining that space. And that's to be meaningful to them. And that's what is really at the core of placemaking. More locally, we saw in the CHOP or Chaz, depending on what you want to call it, the painting that was occurring there on the street and the natural community building that was going on. So again, just very organic, ground up placemaking efforts. The other thing I think that's been really interesting this year with COVID is, as we know, it seems like everybody's gotten more interested in everything virtual, given that we're all operating that way. And so I've seen some initiatives in web-based placemaking, or what I would call it. And so this Decameron Row, we were not involved in this project, but it's super cool if you want to check it out. So definitely recommend that. So, oops, excuse me, sorry. Okay, so, oh my goodness, what's going on with my mouse here? Hold on 1 second. I'm going to get rid of my mouse, put it out of the way. So the tenets of placemaking, again, coming from more of an urbanism, public art arena, are first that it involves the community. Certainly it involves the community in the outcome. Ideally, it also involves them in the creative process, maybe even the construction or implementation process. A place is defined as a space that has a meaning that's been imbued to it by people and that they feel it is significant. And so that usually comes from linking that space to some sort of historical or cultural events or history or heritage in their neighborhood or at that location. So frequently you'll see memorial art in places in particular. Third, that it's family friendly, so it's it should be very inclusive. That includes in terms of being accessible to people of all abilities. And then finally, it should have things that just make people happy and bring joy to people. And the reason that is generally what they're finding is we behave better if we're happy. And so it generally fosters positive behaviors and offsets negative behaviors in spaces where a placemaking is occurring, particularly if it's occurring organically. And so cities actually and governments have become very interested in and advocates of placemaking, both intentional and natural and organic, because the statistics show that actually when a space, in a sense, is transformed into a place, meaning the community feels it's important and has attached value to it, people do behave better in that space. There's usually less crime, and also there's the economy generally seems to improve around those spaces. So a lot of cities are taking more strategic and intentional approaches to placemaking. So for the rest of the presentation, I'm just going to run through some projects that we've done to kind of show you how we're taking these placemaking concepts and implementing them with augmented reality. So this was kind of one of our first pioneering projects in really deliberate, intentional placemaking, figuring out how we could use augmented reality to do this. We did this for the Seattle Design Festival about a year and a half ago, 2019. Some of you that are local might recognize this location. It's at 3rd and Pine, which is a very challenging neighborhood. There's a lot of pretty much all the challenges we're having in the United States you can see very prominently on this. I do live on this block, so I'm not disparaging in any way. So anyway, so what we decided to do was see what we could do with augmented reality and taking these principles and really intentionally applying them. So we created a block scale augmented reality experience that goes from 3rd Avenue around to 2nd along Pine. This is still live, so if anybody wants to experience it, you are welcome to reach out to me. But the elements that we have here is, this is actually one of the most historic blocks in Seattle, but most people are not aware of that. I was not aware of that until I moved here. And so a lot of the block is very underappreciated. And so we really wanted to elevate the history and how this block has in particular contributed to Seattle's modern arts and culture movement, which is very important to Seattleites, and how it was really sustainable before sustainability was a thing. And so we created these, if you can see my cursor there, what we call AR tattoos or AR murals. And there was an audio-visual experience that you could listen to and hear the stories of the buildings and the people that have lived here, past, present, and future. Or excuse me, past and present, and you could tap these murals and get additional audio-visual content about the building or about the people that lived there, such as you can see on the right. Those were 2D. The marquee that you see there actually is a 3D element, and so if you walked around, using your phone, you could actually walk around and see that from both, from the front and back. And so.
Quick question for you, if I can step in.
Yeah.
So is this actually using like a native application, or is this on a web browser?
This is actually using a mobile phone-based application.
Okay.
Yeah, and for this we did a dedicated app. So. Yeah.
Gotcha. Oh, and by the way, it'd be magical if you could have the future being projected there.
Well, thank you for that segue. So real quick, though, this side was very history focused. And so we recreated actually this, you can see this historic photo here. So one of the things we wanted to do was elevate some of the happier times on the block. We believe this was actually at the end of World War I in 1918. But there was a lot of, and there still is a lot of change going on the block. And so one of the, there's actually a skyscraper scheduled to go up behind the building that you just saw. And it's been very controversial in the neighborhood. And so a lot of that controversy has occurred on the fact that it's been so hard to communicate and work with the city or get to City Hall, which is the main way to get your views heard still in Seattle. And so we visualized the Future Skyscraper, which you can see here, to help people understand kind of the scope and scale of the building and how it would impact the neighborhood. The other thing we did, that's just some folks there, that was kind of fun. This took a huge group effort, so I want to give a shout out to everybody that worked on this, especially Susan Oldham and Shauna Ruff. If you guys are out there, just could not have done it without them. Whoops, let me go back. But we also did, I thought I had a slide in here, but we also did some real world activities as part of this, which is part of traditional placemaking. So we had sidewalk chalk drawing, but we also had art stations, real world art stations that people could sketch what they would like to see or what they felt the future of Seattle skyline should look like to help engage them and promote kind of a productive and positive conversation around the changes that are occurring on the block. So those are all very integral to what the placemaking philosophy is, to provoke and promote productive conversation with people. We took these same concepts actually down to the Tenderloin. I have a nonprofit from when I used to live down there. And so we worked with the Boys and Girls Club to create a tour of their neighborhood. Again, very similar type of concepts being applied and also outcomes. So the Tenderloin, if you're not familiar, is an underrepresented, underserved neighborhood in San Francisco. A lot of the similar challenges that we have here at 3rd and Pine. And a lot of the kids that live there, they're either immigrant or first generation immigrant. And you know, they have their identity, you know, our identity is very tied to our neighborhoods. And so we helped them understand through this helping them create an augmented reality tour of their neighborhood or placemaking experience for their neighborhood, the history. And it was really great to see how they began to see their neighborhood in a new way, and then think about where they're from in a different way, and then how that really kind of began to, you know, was a piece of the puzzle about how they began to form a new version of their identity about those things. So space activation projects that we've worked on, kind of the difference, the way we differentiate between placemaking and space activation, a lot of similar elements, but the community usually is not involved. It's kind of one directional. And the idea is that you're kind of creating events and activities for people to do within a space. This was a super cool project actually that is still going on. We were working with some folks, the Tank and technodramatists in New York City. The project is called Manana Land, and it was part of kind of an initiative. Obviously, they are performing arts theater companies, and with COVID have obviously been so impacted. And so this was a way for them to bring what they do outside during COVID in a safe manner. And so we helped them create a scavenger, augmented reality scavenger hunt using the Scavenger AR app. And so they took a very theatrical approach, wrote scripts, and it was very interactive. This actually, the one we're seeing here, is actually going to be coming out in the next week or two. And then we had, they did one in each borough. Whoops, now it's not there now. Am I there? Let's see. There we go. Okay. They did a story in each borough, and I hope nobody will be offended by the political implications. We did not write the script. But anyway, so we created a lot of AR assets that together kind of invited people that went through this tour, and you could do it in, individually or in your COVID safe groups, to kind of go through this storytelling tour in which you found elements and interacted with them, and together by the end it kind of determined what you were going to encounter. So it's very fun. So far we've done the Bronx. This was from Staten Island, and the one for Manhattan was coming out in the hopefully next week. And then there'll be a couple more for Brooklyn, and I'm missing one of the boroughs, Queens. So, but this is something we're seeing a lot of interest in, kind of this combining actually of theater and placemaking and augmented reality. So. And then this was a space activation we actually did in downtown Seattle for the holidays. So we had 5 stations around Westlake Park, which is kind of like the central park of Seattle. And people could come down in a COVID safe way and interact and do a lot of selfies with these. It was part of the Downtown Seattle Association's annual holiday festival, but obviously they couldn't hold that this year because of COVID. And so they wanted to do something that was COVID safe and still festive and fun, and get people back downtown for community building and also to support their retailers. So we took inspiration here, I'm sure you can see, from Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer with the Bumble. So. And this was actually my favorite spot that we did. This was in McGraw Park, which I didn't even realize it constituted a park before we did this, but on the north side of Westlake Center, there is a small kind of square. And so we created kind of a Christmas tree forest. And what I loved about this is it really showcased what's possible with mobile AR, in that you could walk through this forest with your phone and, between all of the trees and everything.
So
yeah,
just a quick question there. So if somebody's just, downtown during the holidays, how do they know that this exists?
So there was a few ways. Like I said, the Downtown Seattle Association it was their festival, and so they were really doing all the promotion for it. But there was site signage. So if you were walking by, you and saw the sign, you would realize there was something you could engage with. That being said, when we talked to people and engaged with them, we were finding that most people came down with the knowledge that it was there, and were coming down intentionally to do it. So most people found out about it through social media and came down that way.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah, and we're finding that's really, really important, especially right now, because most people have never used augmented reality. They think you're talking about virtual reality when you even mention to them. And so the promotion part right now is very, very key to getting engagement, user engagement with it. We were fortunate that they had, again, real world activities going on at the same time, the light displays and everything. So we also find that's a really, really valuable thing to do. Having real world components is important for people. And it kind of helps create the magic as well. It's kind of that, in our opinion, it's the blend of the real world and the digital world that is magical for people.
Yeah, thank you.
And then the tour projects, I would say the one that we have that's really squarely in that, although I think it can also be classified as a history experience, is what we're working with the Richmond Public Schools to create a augmented reality history experience tour for Monument Avenue to complement a new history curriculum that they're teaching at their high schools for juniors and seniors. They're just piloting it this year, and so this is actually currently in design, but it's really kind of revealing to us even and them like the power of like what you can do in augmented reality. This was actually a project that was planned and in the works before all the BLM, before George Floyd was killed and before all the movements. So it was over a year ago. And when all the statues started coming down, we were like, oh no, what are we going to do now? Because we were planning to use them as our object markers. And thank God they all came down, and although we're still fingers crossed that Lee will come down. But they all came down, but we were like, what should we do? But everybody felt it was just still too important. So we've had to kind of like redesign and reconceptualize the whole thing. But I think it's even going to be better than it would have been otherwise.
So that actually ties in. We have a question from Dan, and he's asking, what are your methods for spatial anchoring? Geolocation, computer vision, QR codes.
So why don't we save that question to the end, if that's okay? Because there's kind of a combination of things we're doing, and that might just be easier to cover because we look at it differently for each project, basically.
Okay.
So I'll just wrap this up real quick, and then we can transition to that. So we're going to have 5 stops, 5 AR locations. Some of them have multiple stories, but some of the things we're doing here, as an example, is the Rumors of War, which you can kind of sort of see on the side of the slide. There is a real world statue that out in front of the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. And Kehinde Wiley created that statue to basically to replicate the pose. It's in visual conversation with the Jeb Stuart statue that used to be at the other end of Monument Avenue. And that statue has now been removed. And so what we're doing now is we're actually recreating that statue in augmented reality and placing it near or adjacent to his statue so that it's now can be kind of in its interpretive type of position, and telling about what inspired Kehinde Wiley. So this is something that you'd never be able to do any other way than augmented reality, obviously. And then the focal point of a lot of what we're doing is the Lee Monument and Lee Circle, which is now called Marcus David Peters Circle, at least informally, and using that to tell a lot of the community's stories. So this tour is coming out of like a very intense effort over the last 6 months of working with the community. We have a steering committee of about 25 people consisting of Richmond Public Schools, some of the teachers, the parents, the students, the local museums. So that's one of the key and great things about using a placemaking approach is that community engagement, preferably involving them in the design, at least the content creation side, because it really helps build relationships. And, we're able to talk about a lot of these race issues in a healthy and productive way that'll also leave an asset for the community that'll certainly complement the history curriculum, but also will be publicly available. So just real quick, the things that we're finding that AR can really enhance placemaking or any design process is we can really add a lot of a lot greater context to the history. So previously where you might have just had a public artwork, like these statues, now we can add a whole digital layer to kind of give context to that. We're able to achieve juxtapositions like we did with the 2 statues I showed you that, again, is achievable no other way. And even this we can add a lot of joy and interest and whimsy and even physicality by having people interact with the content. We saw that a lot actually with our holiday experience. Even though we didn't have any true, I guess what you'd say, interactions, we just didn't have the time and they didn't have the budget to create that. We found that it was actually very interactive for people, just getting people to do selfies and that kind of thing. People even said it felt like a game. So, and then we're finding with the storytelling components, we're able to be much more responsive to the community's input. Certainly that's the case with the Richmond, Virginia project. In terms of the challenges that we face, this is true on all our AR projects, and I'm sure folks that are working in AR out there, the same, is that people need to see it to get it. Because there's just not familiarity amongst the public. It's just really hard to explain to people. So, but once they see it, once they try it, like the light bulb goes off and they just start seeing use cases everywhere and get very excited. So that can be, a challenge to overcome that initially. We also find that when we're working with people during design, you really have to give them something to respond to for that same reason. And so it is a very, and the main thing is it's a very time-intensive process in terms of working with the communities to do that. And we've been seeing that particularly during COVID, trying to guide somebody through an augmented reality app virtually over Zoom has its own unique challenges. So. And then finally, just kind of placemaking design principles. So obviously safety is paramount, physical safety, trip hazards. Also people are very distracted. So, making sure you're cognizant that they're going to have to be aware of traffic and, those kinds of things. So we're very strategic about where and how we place locations, AR locations. Accessibility, making it as accessible as possible to people of all abilities. We're still trying to figure that out for blind and hearing impaired, but we're making progress on that. In terms of accessibility, again, we just try to make sure that the spot that we're locating the content in is accessible to people of all abilities. So community involvement is the key. That's what really distinguishes placemaking from other forms of design. And then I think the main thing that is kind of unique about mobile AR and augmented reality placemaking and space activations and tours relative to, say, VR is, we kind of have opposite goals in a way. We're actually trying to get people more connected with their real world environment, whereas VR, you're obviously giving them a whole contained experience. So that really influences how we approach our projects. We're also very intentionally trying to build community through the design process and through the outcome. And then finally, we're trying to really promote conversation and sharing of these experiences. And that's something we've been really pleased with, particularly the sharing that we've observed is in contrast to a lot of other apps and tech where it's really one person to one device. We see a lot of what we kind of call sidecar people doing the experiences, so multiple people sharing one phone and doing it together. So that that's kind of one of our aims, is to do things that are shareable, not just shareable through social media. And then finally, so that really kind of begins to impact how we think about immersive design. So I know, again, this is kind of something that's different. We kind of have a different paradigm in our opinion between VR and mobile AR. So I think of VR more as like watching a movie. It's not to say, like, obviously very interactive, you can make it very interactive, but you're delivering a whole environment, a whole contained, in a sense, narrative and everything in that, and obviously very immersive. We find mobile AR, I would say it's equally, maybe I'm biased, potentially more immersive, but for very different reasons. Obviously, you're not in a fully self-contained environment. But what we try to do, we see it more like a book where you're engaged with a play. So you're always very aware you're not in the environment, but what makes it immersive is that engaging of the person's imagination. So I think most of us can relate to that if you're watching a play or a book or reading a book, like, you could be completely absorbed, and it's because it's got your full attention and particularly engaging your imagination. So that's it. So we could transition. I'm going to stop sharing on my side. I can reshare, I guess, as needed. Let me get back so I can see you guys. This is great. I can see you now.
Fantastic.
Well, this talking into the air.
Well, I apologize. I came off camera. My internet is a little bit weak tonight, unfortunately. But we'll go ahead and jump into questions. Let's go ahead and go with Dan's question if we want to revisit that. Yeah. And I'll go ahead and put it here on the screen, asking about your methods for spatial anchoring, geolocation, computer vision, QR code, etc.
Yeah. So, computer vision is part and parcel to anything mobile AR. So yes, on that. There's, different, we are using geolocation too, but what I've come, it's kind of like, and actually it varies by project. So the way we're kind of tech agnostic is what we say. And so when we come to a project, we first try to understand what their goals are for that project, and then look at, like, okay, well, what are the options for meeting those goals, both, in terms of content and then also technically. And because the tech is changing so rapidly, we find, like what we can do today, we couldn't do a few months ago, and I'm sure we can do things a few months from now that we can't do now. So you're always having to relook at the tech. So we have used geolocation, certainly on the past, present, future. What we did, that's kind of a good example, like where we actually had a geo-fenced area. But then, so it kind of got you in the vicinity, and then we were using actually a lot of marker-based AR, and I know we actually make a good bit of use of marker-based AR. We're still finding that it's very reliable. Because we believe strongly people still need some real-world alert that something is there, and again, it creates that bridge between the digital and real world. So what we've been using a lot of is illustrations. So we really try to make sure that whatever marker it is, it's part of the experience. It's not like just a QR code, or, I mean, QR codes don't even work that well for AR, but it's like, so for past, present, future and the holiday experience, the illustrations were reflective of the content and kind of hint to the content so that they hopefully create some interest in that. We are looking at we've been working closely with the company in terms of your computer vision part of the question, working closely with a company called Augmented City, which we love them. They are an AR cloud company. Immersal is another one that we're looking at. And so that will ultimately, hopefully, make our lives a lot easier. It can also create more stability with the content. So that is one of the things with marker-based AR, and I should say we're always using marker-based with SLAM, simultaneous location and mapping. So that's part and parcel of everything we do with any of these technologies. We don't do a lot of QR codes, as I mentioned. One, they don't necessarily, in our experience, work that well with AR. The computer vision actually works better with some sort of photograph or illustration. We do use QR codes, particularly if most of our experiences have ended up being app-based, and so we'll use a QR code to have people be able to download the app very, very easily. Some of those questions are related to, in terms of the technology, it depends on what type of technology we're using. The way I think about AR is I kind of put AR in three, and all of this is mobile AR. I'm not talking headset AR. I kind of put mobile AR into three buckets. So there's WebXR, which is like Eighth Wall and those types of things. There's app-based AR, which we tend to use Unity for building, and then or our partners do that we work with, and then there's social media AR, and like I said, we're working across all of them. For what we've been finding, at least so far, is that for the level and types of interactions that we are looking to do, and then the size and scale and quantity of the content that we're using, such as the models, it's really, you're really at the app type of category. WebXR, though, is coming along really fast. So, we're always looking at that at every single project we're doing. Excuse me. The last time we looked at it was in like November for the holiday experience, and we just found that the content was still very, it hopped around a lot, flickered a lot, so the frame rate is still a challenge. So we did go with an app on that. And the other thing too that we're finding is, so a lot of that is the customer or the client thinking that they don't want people to have to download an app, and I totally get that, right? But again, it just depends on, like, you have to think about what is the psychology, what is the paradigm the user is bringing to this, right? So if you're in a store, right, and they're using AR to kind of market something to you, obviously you don't want to download a dedicated app for that, and WebXR is a really great solution for that use case, that paradigm. But for events, for the types of things we're doing, if you think about it, if you're going to an event for anything, you usually have to purchase a ticket, like you're just already predisposed that there's something I'm going to have to do in order to be able to do this, engage in this experience. So we really haven't found it to be a barrier in that regard. And the reality is, right now, at least the last time we checked in November, like, there are literally the same number of steps between the user and the content in WebXR and app. So now the steps are a little bit different, but there's 8 steps. And so that's just kind of where we are. In terms of social media, we're always re-looking at that as well, because they're advancing so fast, particularly Snapchat. I know most people are, engaged with Facebook and Instagram, but Snapchat is like miles ahead. We tend to use, we're using the world camera a lot for what we're doing. We're not doing a lot of self-facing AR effects, especially for these things. And in terms of what Snapchat's capable of, really, really good stuff. So very robust, and most of our people on our team come from animation and gaming background, and their lens studio was very geared towards people with that background. So some of the things we're doing, we're starting to think, well, maybe we could just use Snapchat, for it. So we're always relooking at that. Long answer. I hope I answered your question. Any other questions?
That was wonderful. I actually have a question for you. So, keeping all of those things in mind, like there's just a lot of considerations, it seems, for each project. So what are the biggest challenges with working with outdoor world scale AR?
Yeah, outdoor world scale AR, it's like VR. It's like the fundamental technology, is the same across everything, but so the same artistic and technical skill set is needed. But kind of how you're finishing it off is different. And we're very much of a content focused company, art first content focused company. So we produce content for other people in addition to our own projects, so for other people's VR and AR projects as well. But I would say, outdoor world scale is its own animal. It's one of those things that is really easy in theory and difficult in practice. And so until you actually go through it, like our first outdoor AR project, we're like, oh, right. There's just, because your brain's just not used to thinking about these things. So I would say the biggest challenges are real world alignment. It's come a long, long way and advancing all the time. And that's one of the reasons we're so excited about Augmented City and Immersal, what they're doing, because what you really need to get that good real world alignment is excellent computer vision. And so that was one thing that I really gained an appreciation of, is this is going to sound really disappointing, because it was disappointing for me. It's not a 3D problem, what we're trying to do. It's a computer vision problem. And so I really started to think about mobile AR, at least anyway. It's really like real-time photoshopping, right? That's what's really happening here. And the 3D spatial computing part really it's the tool to get there. And so, but until I really went through a whole project that way, it was, I was stuck in this kind of like, it's a 3D solution I'm looking for. And so that's kind of, outdoor world scale just takes that and it's like on steroids, right? So if you're, trying to align something like that skyscraper that we did between the two buildings, that is still very, very hard right now in terms of accuracy. Like getting the building there is not hard. Getting it where you want it to be is still really hard, or getting it to where it's that accurate. So I would say that's the biggest challenge, really. So.
Yeah. So I have a couple of questions. I guess the first one is just some background about yourself. So you mentioned architecture at the beginning. So how did you get into AR?
Yeah, well, good question. If you'd asked me probably 5 years ago if I'd be doing this, I would be like, what's AR? So that being said, I have since learned that it is actually a fairly well-worn path from architectural engineering, which is what I was in particular, to this field. A lot of that is because we're very, the kind of the spatial computing revolution that's happening these days on your mobile phone, and the headsets happened about 30 years ago in building design and construction. So we went from, literally drawing. I was still drawing on Mylar and paper when I graduated college, to doing everything, designing in 3D on a computer. within 5 years. So it was just like this hurricane of change. And so a lot of that mental transition is, and technological transition is what's happening now. It's just moving from our desktop now and TV and movie screens to our phone. So it's the same type of transition. And so I think there's a few things that kind of make this a well-worn path for people. In my background is one, we kind of have had this experience already. We're used to dealing and thinking in 3D, and we're generally naturally 3D oriented people. If you're in building design and construction, just like engineers are generally naturally 3D oriented people. But we're very used to flipping between 3D and 2D. So most of our designs are still, obviously VR is kind of changing that now, but you're designing in 3D, but it's ultimately showing up for the user in 2D. And that's what that kind of gets back to my, this is real-time photoshopping comment. Ultimately, what really matters in mobile AR is what does it look like on the person's screen. And so that really gets into more about human perception. And I really gained an appreciation in working with this of how sophisticated our vision is and how good we are at detecting reality and not reality, and how much lighting plays a big part in that. And so those are all kind of things that, again, people from my background are used to thinking about. And then also people in kind of the animation arena in particular and gaming are used to, they're very trained to understand human visual perception. It's not just creating the 3D content, it's how will this be perceived. And so that was kind of a mental shift. So in terms of just the logistics, I was in architectural engineering for almost 20 years. I transitioned actually into the last 10 years. I did energy simulation, so was very used to working with simulation engines, which in a sense is kind of, there's a similarity there to that. And then kind of took a right turn and ended up going back to school and getting a master's in Asian studies, so kind of a social science histories master's, which actually I use just as much with what we're doing. So there's kind of a lot of different strengths coming together, but I'm really super happy doing what I'm doing now. I feel like I get to hits all my buttons for sure. So
yeah, so you had mentioned Snap,
yeah,
and I guess Facebook has a few things out there as well, and others. But I guess the cool thing is anybody can get into this now. Like, you don't need anything kind of special equipment-wise. You can start experimenting with maybe WebXR first, or download Unity. It's free. Unreal is free, the game engines. So it's really become accessible, which is
I agree.
awesome. But I'm thinking about mobile AR on the phone. We always talk about, well, how long can somebody hold that? What's their attention span versus glasses? But I mean, glasses are going to be probably a pretty long time before they're, an everyday habit kind of thing.
Yeah.
So how do you find, I guess, the length of the experience? Do you need to cut it off, or?
That's a really good question. In fact, I'm kind of wrestling with that right now on the Monument Avenue project, because it's getting long, and so I'm like, there's a couple things to think about. One is it's people's attention, right? And then the other is battery life. Like mobile AR just chews through your battery super quick. So you've actually got to really keep that in mind. Generally, really good question. The general rules of thumb I use, and we're learning with each project, is definitely keep things short, so and break things up. So we tend with our kind of audio visual information, narration, basically, we try to break it up into little nuggets of stories that people then can opt in at different levels. So we kind of have a top level that is super short that I try to keep 30 seconds to a minute. Right, so there's not a lot that you can communicate in that, and then if they, we're like, okay, you want to find out more, and then they can delve into the experience. And then you can go a bit longer. I still think, you know, 2 to 3 minutes is about the attention span on the street for people. So this is much more, you know, if you think about it, like if you were just going to a real world tour, you know, or activity, you know, you've got lots going on, and, you know, you maybe have other goals while you're there too. And so working with that and just being aware that people need to be aware. And, you know, most people want short form content anyway these days. So yeah, I think, you know, the deeper stories, we've done 5 minutes before, but most people said that was too long. So I think 2 to 3. We're not finding too much of an issue of people holding their phone. I mean, I guess if you had a tablet or something, like people's arms aren't getting tired, I guess so we haven't seen that. It's more that attention and just wanting to move on to additional content. So yeah, let's see here.
Fantastic. We've got a couple of other questions, a couple from the Daniels and a comment from Kevin. Okay. So we'll just go in order. So have you considered viewing installations, curved screens with cameras providing de facto pass-through, any of that?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Let's see. Have you considered viewing installations? I'm not sure what you mean by that. Curved screens with cameras providing a de facto pass-through. I'm going to need some additional info for that question. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, we'll take Dan Costello's question next, and let Dan go ahead and give us some more context. He is highly technical and probably smarter than everybody here.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah. So this is great. So metrics, KPIs are hard to come by right now for AR. Really, we're so for apps, you know, for app-based, it's really, we're going by download. Definitely so we are, because of the sharing aspect of it though, we do feel we get a lot more engagements than the app downloads show. So we've talked about that, and we explained that up front with our customers, that like I said, in contrast to a lot of other apps where it's one download, it's reasonable to say that's one person engaging with your app, your content. But with AR, particularly for the types of experiences we're doing where people are like sharing it, you know, we're finding generally like a 3-to-1 ratio is really conservative. Even for the holiday experience, we were seeing 4 and 5 people walking around sharing a phone. So, and that's one of the goals for us, right? Like that might not be a goal for an AR experience you're doing, but for us, that's what we're going for, is that real world sharing of the experience. So that has been our major KPI is still just downloads. There's not ways I'm aware of yet, if you know them, please share them, of knowing what content people are engaging with. The closest thing, and just because I don't know of a way to do that yet. And we're finding the same thing on WebXR. So like right now, at least with 8th Wall, like last time I checked, really they're only able to tell you when you scanned, you know, in terms of length of engagement, all of that is still not out there that I'm aware of. If again, please share if you know. I think there's a lot of work, a lot of potential there that could be done. I'm sure it's in the works, but it's, you know, it's just a little bit, it's not like a web click that's easy to determine. We did see the next best thing we had was if you have multiple, so people do, and we encourage it, do tend to close the app between, if you're doing app, and this would be true for WebXR too, close the app between locations. And that's actually a good thing because of the battery, right? So you want them to conserve battery. I actually encourage people to do that. So that you can generally tell, like through the apps, you know, on the backside of the App Store and Google Play Store, how many times people have opened your app, assuming they're sharing the information. We do kind of take that as a somewhat of an indicator that if we're seeing the average number of times the app is opened is 2.5, then we're saying, okay, well, we know people are at least engaging with two of the AR locations. It's not uncommon for people not to do every location. So if you have 8 stops on in your experience, they're going to pick and choose what they want to do. And so in terms of if you're dealing with narrative storytelling, it helps to reinforce the main points you're trying to get across multiple times, because you don't know where they're going to, what they're going to choose. Let's see.
So Daniel has clarified on his previous question, talking about like curved screen on the sidewalk, like a tiny billboard where you kind of pass by it, stand in the curve, and have the experience with the cameras on the other side bring the rest into you.
Oh, that sounds very cool. We have not tried that. I know I think what I'm sensing is like kind of a multimedia experience. There are things going on that I see people combining projection art with mobile augmented reality. That's not something we've tried. We've been talking with some folks like Augmented City to do that, because potentially that becomes a recognizable image. I mean, that's ultimately what you're after in mobile AR, is the camera has to recognize what it's seeing and know, okay, I'm supposed to put this digital object there when I see that image. So you could combine things like that. In fact, we have done, just in terms of testing, like if you have a photo that you're using as your image marker and tracker, that's the main thing I think I didn't emphasize too much. So like SLAM tracking, you have to use that. That's the only way to do this. If you had that image on your screen, you could use that as well. So that sounds like maybe kind of what you're talking about, having something on the sidewalk to do that, or a billboard that people could point their phone to. The trick is always getting them to realize they can do that. And right now, that's the biggest challenge, is just like audience education and awareness. I think a couple of years from now, people will immediately think, I'm going to pull out my phone and see what's around me. But right now, that's not where people are at.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure when I read Dan's comments there. I was thinking more like, Minority Report. So as you're walking through the mall, there's a trigger, and that physical installation starts to display something to you, but not through the phone.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I'm sorry, I'm like so focused on mobile augmented reality in this conversation. But yes, I think, in the broader sense of augmented reality, definitely possible. We have not been doing that, but I definitely see people doing those types of things. And, sound augmented reality is a whole thing in and of itself. And so be very cool. Yeah. Okay. Let's see.
Daniel has come back, just kind of, circling back to what he was talking about before, creating content from a marketing perspective, if there's a way to leverage pixels or anything to attribute traffic and engagement from the particular asset. Yeah,
that's a really good question. I think that's above my pay grade. That's what I say. I think there's a lot of work to be done there, for sure. There's a lot of potential for to develop metrics and ways to measure engagement with AR. So
awesome. Well, we are just about out of time here, but I do want to go ahead and throw this up because Kevin gave you a really nice shout out for presenting your groundbreaking work. And honestly, it's true. Like you do wonderful things. We are so happy to have you, and happy to have you as a member and get to see your lovely face, at least once a month. So, so we appreciate you. And thank you, Kevin, for giving that shout out. That's wonderful.
Very nice. Thank you, Kevin. Oh yeah. So well, this was really nice. It was fun talking with you guys, and thank you. I know you guys do a lot of work behind the scenes, so thank you for that and for helping build the community here.
Oh, we are happy to do it. And if you would like to know more information about joining us and getting to see all of our shining faces more often, scan this QR code real quick or go to the vrara.com/Seattle, and you will get to talk to Kirby and or myself about becoming a member, and we would love to have you. So with that, we bid you good night, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. Thanks, Julia.
Thank you, guys.